Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, today we have somebody who is another CEO, just like last week as well. We're getting a trend here of CEOs. But before we introduce him, Steve, are you prepared to engage?
I am prepared to engage, Professor Game.
Let's do this. Let's go. So very quickly, who is Steve? He is, as I said, the CEO of Pug Interactive, which is a technology and design leader in engagement, retention, and community activation. He has more than 17 years of direct experience in the video game industry, where he helped design and produce several AAA games for Disney Interactive, Electronic Arts, Sega, and Ubisoft that have generated sales in excess of $650 million. And he's also frequently sought as a speaker, having spoken in the Game Developers Conference, South by Southwest, SIGGRAPH, Banff New Media Festival, GameON Finance, nextMEDIA, and several others like Gamification Europe, which is where we actually met. And he also recently enjoyed an amazing Lebanese dinner with an actual Canadian astronaut. That sounds very, very exciting. So Steve, can you tell us, with all these exciting things going on, what does a typical day, week, month, however you want to frame it, how does being Steve Bocska look like?
Oh boy. So can I call you Rob, or do I have to call you Professor Game?
You can call me Rob, of course.
I can call you Rob. Okay, Rob.
It's permitted just for this interview.
Thank you. So I thank you for that introduction. Appreciate that. My normal day, what does that look like? So we have customer projects all around the world. So being here in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, we have very early starts because in order for us to deal with our European customers, at the end of the day for them is early in the morning for us. And we have to check in with all of our customers pretty much every day just to see how everyone's systems are going. The gameplay systems that we put in place are typically quite sophisticated. There's a lot of moving parts and levers to pull and a lot of things to pay attention to. So yeah, at the start of the day, we check our existing projects. We look at the metrics on them. We have to respond to what we're seeing, which usually involves some kind of design tuning or gameplay adjustments. We will often have calls after that with the projects that we have in development. So there's a lot of iteration and design and discovery and exploration and just the craziness of pulling together some of these massive projects. We have to deal with those very early in the day as well. And then once all of the dust is settled on the urgent stuff, that's when we shift into the more strategic frame of mind. So there's the business development strategizing, looking at new market opportunities, how we're going to be presenting ourselves to those opportunities, and then usually close out the day talking about our platform roadmap issues and how we're going to be rolling out the next wave of exciting new features on our platform and make sure that we always keep all of our customer projects on the cutting edge of what's possible.
Wow. And I just have one small question from all that. Who was the Canadian astronaut?
So Josh, so we have a project with the Canadian Space Agency right now. It's in development. The first mini phase of that has already gone live, which was an ebook that we developed, which wasn't technically, I guess it's not really part of our gamification system, but it's part of the larger system in general. So the Canadian Space Agency has an astronaut right now on board the International Space Station. So it's David St. Jacques. And David's mission is running for 6 months, and we have some very, very cool stuff coming. I probably shouldn't speak too much about it right now, but in the coming weeks, you'll see some of that stuff certainly come to market and come to life. And we're probably just a few short weeks away from the first wave of that coming out. And the space agency was here in Vancouver visiting with us, and as part of the socialization phase of their visit. We did go out for dinner with not just the administration, but one of the Canadian astronauts in waiting. And Josh is based at the Houston, what is it? It's the Johnson Space Center, I guess, in Houston. And we were very, very fortunate to have him here for an event. And boy, I tell you, there's no greater way to make you feel like you wasted your life than to talk to an astronaut. Those guys are remarkable in what they've done, what they can do, and what they've yet to accomplish. So it was a fascinating conversation, but also a humbling one.
Interesting. Absolutely interesting. Because as you say, I mean, astronauts are doing these amazing things. And I'm sure you got a lot of insights that you'll be able to apply to your life and to future, just in the future to your business as well, just from talking to these kinds of people.
Well, I'll say one of my favorite things about jobs like this or projects like the space agency is that we get embedded right into their organization. I've spoken to scientists that have developed the Canada arm and that are working on the what are they called, the spacewalks, and all of the administration and the support and the very, very bright people. We need to talk to them to understand how they want the gamification systems presented and how we can be faithful and accurate to the mission and what they're trying to communicate, because we're not just slapping in a bunch of badges and points. We're actually building out systems that are quite sophisticated, that have a lot of content requirements within them that are presented in very playful game-like ways. For this project, we're even building out some mini games that are supported by the larger gamification platform context. So yeah, man, just like, drilling in, digging in, understanding what these really brilliant people are doing and the cutting edge of the science, and pulling that forward and turning into an engagement pathway that has the business outcomes that they're looking for. Boy, it makes it easy to get up in the morning, I got to tell you.
It certainly does. And anybody listening to you, Steve, right now, be thinking, wow, this guy just gets up in the morning and he starts, an amazing day and everything is going incredible. So he's got it all figured out. Absolutely. And he's always had it figured out, because that's the way it sounds like. And I'm sure you do, as you're mentioning, many amazing things. But I would also like to know, and for you to tell us a story, Steve, a story not only of when you're talking to the Canadian Space Agency and doing all these amazing things, but of a time where it actually didn't go that well, where you had what we could call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning, where you actually, of course, you went into this experience, it didn't go well, or it completely crashed, whichever it was, and you absolutely learned fantastic experiences from that, which actually have also helped you be in the place where you are today. Can you tell us a story of one of those failures, or the biggest failure moment that you've had in your career?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you closed the question out with that, because when you first started talking, I was going to say, boy, I sure hope I wasn't giving people the impression that everything always goes smoothly, because it really, really doesn't. And it takes a long road to get to the point where you understand and see enough about what's gone wrong to be able to avoid those problems, which I think is a big part of what has helped us be successful, in particular recently. So I guess I would throw that one pretty far back into my career. When I first got started in video games, my first job in the industry was at Disney. So Disney was creating a bunch of edutainment software, a whole catalog of them, which are two awful words, education and entertainment, to try to put those together. They are very typically incompatible. So one of the things that you learn very quickly when you're doing something like that, especially for a younger audience of children where the challenge is awesome, like trying to make education fun, is that you are not making the game for yourself. And whatever the experience is, whatever your instincts may be about how you feel something should be experienced, you have to put those aside. You have to put them on hold and say, this isn't for me, this isn't a vanity project, or this isn't about boosting my own ego, about building the game that I want to play. You're never going to learn that lesson quicker than making a game for a 5-year-old. So you quickly learn how not to design and how not to approach the problem. And it's tricky. What's even trickier is that in gamification, you take the notion of creating an engaging interaction design, which is challenging enough to begin with, and we also now have to layer on top of that that there's a business outcome that needs to be met. And there's a requirement for doing that. And I'd say that the times when I felt that we weren't as successful as I wished or would have liked for us to have been was when we didn't find the right balance between the two. So it's when the business requirement was pulled too far forward and we lost sight of the engagement, or less commonly, when the engagement or the interactivity, the playfulness, is put so far forward that it fails to deliver the business requirements. So usually we err on the side of making sure the business requirements are being fulfilled for obvious reasons. But it is a balancing act, and we need to find that line between them. So we've been lucky, and we're fortunate with our platform as well, that even when our projects launch and we realize that things aren't balanced properly, so we have a gameplay system that maybe doesn't feel as fair as it should to the users. We have a lot of levers and dials and knobs that we can pull, push, and twist to very quickly tune the system. So, things like scarcity and availability and, payoff tables for things like quests. And there's a lot of things that are configurable within our system that we can quickly respond to. So even when things go not as planned, we can still respond pretty quickly and get systems tuned. So what I learned, I guess, from early on is that you're almost never going to get it right. But the way you resolve that is to be prepared to make adjustments quickly after launch. And if you don't have those tools to do that, then you can be in a real state of hurt.
So I would say that probably one of the main learnings that we can take away as well, and it's something to reflect upon when we are facing our project as well, is that, as you say, you're not going to be right the first time. And there's many strategies to face that. As you say, you can either be very well prepared to shift and to change once you launched. You can do a lot of play testing, but I'm sure that's something that you did as well. But I think a combination of all these things is very, very important. And it's I think the biggest barrier there is not technological, it's not technical, it's not our intellectual capacity, it's more emotional. I think it has a lot more to do with the ego that is saying, your thing, you're doing it right, and changing if you thought it was right is a lot harder than actually doing the change itself. Have you seen that in your experience with yourself, and especially it's easier to spot it when it's on somebody else?
Yeah, I'd say that was a great way of summarizing it. I'll also address a couple of things in what you just said. So when I talk about getting the system tuned right and you have to be responsive, that applies to the kinds of projects that we do now. I've seen in the marketplace a number of gamification solutions where you just basically clip in a module or a widget or a plugin, and it pretty much gives you the points and badges, and it does some very, very straightforward things. Obviously, that's not what I'm talking about. Those systems are quite rigid. They solve a very, very specific problem, and that's not what we do. So we do
when they solve a problem.
Okay, sure. Yeah, when they solve a problem. What we do is quite different. So it's more involved, and there's a lot more discovery that's required, and there's a lot more, well, I'll call it gameplay design. And when you do that, it means that you're introducing a very complex system that can be extremely powerful when all cylinders are firing and you're getting people coming in and doing what they need to do, and they're making interesting choices, and they're staying really engaged and active and producing the desired business outcomes. That's when you need to be set up and ready to go to make changes as they're needed. So you have to be really flexible and have flexible technology. You have to be set up to do all of that. But yeah, the dovetail off of that idea is that the thing that you're creating does feel like a baby. And it feels like a baby that you've spent many, many months birthing. It's not something that you just clipped in and you push it out the door. It's not like a bird being shoved out of the nest. It's like an actual child, human, adult, future adult baby. And the ego part of it, as much as I think we'd all like to believe in some way or another that we're artists, there is a commercial reality to what we're doing. And that means that we have to work with our customers, our clients on these projects to find the middle ground. So somehow we have to come in and say, look in my world, I've had people pay hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for the games that I've made. And in your world, whoever our client, partner, customer is, they've been busy trying to bribe those people into doing things for them. So their customers, they'll give them gift cards and whatever else it is that they want to do. So we're coming from two different places, and somehow we have to meet in the middle. Now, we can't do everything for you. We have to do it with you. So that means we have to understand what you're trying to do. You have to understand and appreciate what we're bringing to the table. And we have to put the egos aside and just come up with the best solution, because it's not about the game that I want to make, and it's not about you just doing things the way you want to do it. Somehow we're going to meet in the middle, or else this project isn't going to be as amazing as it could be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And putting the egos aside is I think in almost any instance of gamification and design in general is super, super important. But now, Steve, I would like to make a small or maybe even large shift. Instead of going for that difficult time, can you give us a brief story of actually a success, something that actually did go right, and take us to the ground level? We want to experience it with you. What did that look like? Maybe it's, I don't know, it could be your platform, it could be of a specific project that you did and achieved the objectives that you were after iterations or whatever. But how did it look like? How did it feel like to be working in that project? What did you do right? How did it come to you? We want to be there with you in that story, Steve.
So in the video game world or in the gamification world?
Ideally in the gamification world, but if you feel
Sure.
that the video game one is more compelling, go ahead.
No, I mean, they all have different lessons that can be learned, but I'll do gamification. This one's probably more of a nostalgic favorite than anything, because it was one of our first projects, but it was one of the first ones where I really, really knew that what we were doing was going to make a big difference. And this goes back many years now. Gosh, it must be seven years ago. There's a TV series called Ice Pilots, and it's produced here in Canada. It's on the History Channel. Internationally now, I don't know how many countries it's been in. I'm sure it's probably made its way through Europe at one point or another. And it's kind of like Ice Road Truckers, but in DC-3 airplanes. And they have these northern communities that they have to fly to deliver supplies, and there's all kinds of danger. It's a docuseries. And they had some problems. They had a community that wasn't responding as well to their social media campaigns anymore. And they wanted to really turn up the volume, do something different, which, I mean, think about this 7 years ago where gamification was, it was nowhere. And yet they had the vision, our partners on this project, the broadcaster and the production company and the agency, we said, let's just go for it. We're going off the rails. We're going to do everything differently than anyone's ever done before. To this day, it still stands as one of the most ambitious projects that we ever did. So within the gameplay system, there were everything from tie-ins to their social media campaigns. So within the Facebook page, you could be following the Facebook feeds, earning code words from that, which you would then bring to the game and input those as ways to earn benefits within the gameplay system. On the website itself, there were things that you could do, like play mini games and find different these little hidden icons that were scattered all over the page, and when you clicked them, it would give you these currencies within the system. The one thing that we didn't do that I wish still in hindsight that we had was a better tie into the TV show itself. We were intending to put like little Easter eggs in the show that you could find that would give you advantage within the game. So all of this was, you would earn these currencies within the system, and then you would use that to basically purchase these collector cards. So imagine a viewer of the show, a big fan, doing all of these different things, like watching the show, coming to the Facebook page, coming to the website to effectively show their fandom, show their loyalty, and they accumulate this currency, and then they could spend that currency on these digital collectible cards. And the way we use those cards, I still to this day just love this idea where there were different questions, different challenges every week. So the first week, the question was, I think, who are your favorite cast members from the show? So you do all the things, you'd earn your currency, you'd buy all of the different collector's cards, like little trading cards of the cast members, and you would drag those cards into the answer slot for who are your favorite, your 3 favorite cast members from the show. And you drag it in, and then you would lock your answers. Well, that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning, because you'd now answer that question. The system would socially connect you with other people that had similarly answered that question. So it was creating, by playing this game, you're creating a network of people, not friends that you knew, but friends that you should know because you had so much in common with them. So think about everything that's going on there from a gameplay perspective. So there's all of these different interaction points that the user, in this case a fan, is able to participate in. So it's not just how much money did you spend, which just drives me nuts. That's the only dimension, like as if that's the only thing we care about with a customer brand interaction or an employee company interaction. Is it really all financial? Is that all it comes down to? I don't think it is. I think there's so much more that we should be paying attention to and rewarding people for, like following social media, like interacting with other fans, like coming to our website, like coming to live events, watching broadcasts, whatever. So we should be trapping all of that information and then allowing them to make some interesting choices that have consequence to them, like how do I spend this currency? And then also giving them the freedom to choose their collectibles and how they answer their questions. There's a competitive aspect to it in that people were trying to rank on the leaderboard and trying to win prizes, but really there was a strong sense of community and competition that would bring people together and bring them together.
And you were also helping, it was like a small big data that you were collecting there, because you were understanding who were your users, who were the people who were watching the show, who were the favorite characters, which is an information that otherwise you would have to pay for in many ways. And it's not even as accurate.
Yeah, and Rob, this is when academics like you, game professors like you, are way ahead of the curve, as academics always are, because the data that we collect, I can't think of a project where I felt that it was properly put to good use. And in this world of big data, I think we're doing a fantastic job of collecting stuff, but we're doing a terrible job of analyzing it. And one of the things that we've been really working hard on is to simplify the presentation of this very complex data. So like you said, when you think about all of the choices that people are making within a system and how consequential those choices are, and that every time you make a choice, it's telling you something interesting about that person, something that has potential value. If we don't have better tools to reflect that back to people, then you're collecting data for the sake of collecting it. You're not really getting a lot of value out of it. And that is probably the most underdeveloped part of gamification right now, is that we're either not collecting good data or we're doing a terrible, terrible job of reflecting back what that data is actually telling us.
And it's not an easy question. It's not an easy thing to do. There's a new science that is being created from this data science and etc. It's not necessarily cheap. It could be very, very expensive as well. So it's not easy, not only to collect that data and to analyze it correctly, but also to implement it back with many things. And we could go into many, many, many things that are going on and that you probably know a lot of, because video games actually do get those insights and use them in many, many, many different ways. So, Steve, we've been talking about all these failures, success, amazing things that you've had, this dinner you had with an astronaut. But we would also like to take something home with us for the engagers. If there's any, I don't know if you follow any sort of procedure. Do you have, a series of steps? When you approach a project where you want to use gamification, or the things that you've learned from your experience in the video game industry, how do you approach it? What happens when somebody comes to you and says, Steve, I need your help. What can we do with this problem?
So that's probably more than a podcast interview, and probably more like a semester-long course for a professor game to teach. But I'll talk about, I'll say, two of my most favorite aspects of our process, or the ones where I feel the greatest value is derived. So one of them is how we determine from our discovery phase what the best mechanics are for a project. Now, the way we start is kind of like what I've been describing before, which is taking an audit or an assessment or an inventory of all of the user interactions that are possible between, say, a customer or community member and the brand, or an employee and the company. So that means just listing it all out. So if I'm a customer and I'm a customer of Coca-Cola, for example, what are all of the different touch points, in particular digital touch points, that are available to me to somehow interact with the brand? Well, there's actually buying a product, going to the store, and there's lots of different ways I can do that. There's also coming to the website. There's also seeing a billboard. There's also going to events that are sponsored by Coca-Cola. There's also following social media channels, following you on Twitter, Facebook. It can go on and on and on. So we list those on the left-hand side. Those are the engagement assets, we call them. On the far right, we list the business outcomes, and then beneath that, the stakeholders. So what are you trying to achieve in this program, in this campaign, in this initiative? So often it's, increased sales or better mind share or increase of wallet, frequency of purchase, basket size, all kinds of things. So we list out what those things are. Sometimes it's data. We want to collect better data. And then we list out who those stakeholders are. So left-hand column, we've got engagement assets. Far right-hand side, we've got the business outcomes expected and the stakeholders that need to be happy because of those outcomes. In the middle is where the magic happens, and it's where we bring our knowledge and our insight. That's where we construct the engagement model using the mechanics that are available to us and the ones that our platform supports in particular. So we'll diagnose a little bit, tell us a bit about your community. What sort of characteristics or personality do they have? And what is your brand trying to portray as an image or its personality? And then we try to bring those together. So there's a lot of principles that we can apply here. And we tend to call them the 5 C's. There's even more than 5, but and they all start with C for some reason. So there's competition, which I think a lot of gamification initiatives initially rushed into. So anything that's like points or leaderboards based tends to be a competitive construct. And that has a very limited applicability. It works well probably in sales teams where there is inherent competition. But my favorite is collaboration. Again, another C word. So competition, collaboration, the notion of collection, where people are earning things, building an inventory of things that they care about, that are interesting to them. It's very satisfying and very motivating. Customization is allowing people to make changes to something that are permanent or semi-permanent. When people feel that they've made their mark on something or that they've been able to change something to suit their preferences, it boosts engagement all the time. And completion. So there are a lot of completionists. It's not everybody. It's a certain personality type that seeks to have things done. So, there's 5. There are more, but those are certainly the top 5. And then we take those principles, we align them with what this program or campaign is trying to deliver. And then we have mechanics, proven gameplay engagement mechanics within our platform that we know, okay, well, in this project, because it is first and foremost about collaboration and second about customization, we need to use these features within our system, and this is how we're going to design that model. So that's at the front end. That's how does this project give shape, and what are we actually going to do? How are we going to deliver it? And then the second question is, how are we going to measure it? Like, did this thing actually work? And I know, Rob, you've seen this because you were there, but we've only just recently exposed the notion of what I'm calling Steve's net engagement score, which is an equation that I've come up with based on my years in the video game industry that is providing a very, very powerful insight into how healthy a community is based on its level of engagement. No one's ever done this before.
By the way, just a quick interruption, because this is going to be available in video at some point, I hope in this month or the next, because they're publishing all the videos of Gamification Europe. So hopefully we will have access to that as well very soon. And when we do, it will be available in the webpage with the show notes of Steve. So if you go to professorgame.com, you'll search for Steve, you'll probably find this hopefully already available as well.
Yes, and the white paper that supports the presentation that I made is it's on my to-do list. There's a working draft, but it's we've just been really busy. So it is also coming soon, so you can look forward to that. The simple principle of the equation, I won't go into all of the mathematical mechanics of it, but to measure engagement is to look at really three things that I've found really drives people's interest and sparks their enthusiasm for continuing. So one is giving people interesting choices. So the more interesting choices that you have, it's going to drive people to stay and to be loyal, motivated, and engaged. We see a lot of people doing clicks for the sake of clicks. And that actually doesn't help the cause at all. In fact, if anything, you're frustrating people. So interesting choices, and then you multiply that by the consequence of those choices. So imagine the difference between making a choice between a Big Mac and a Quarter Pounder. There's not a lot of consequence there. I know at the end I'm going to be full and maybe not even feel that great. But when you're having a choice that's between life and death, like, do I turn this way or that way, or this car is coming towards me? Now you're fully engaged, you're alert, your heart is pounding, everything is at a different level. So you don't want to overdo it. There's a way to balance that. So we do like to introduce choices that have consequence. And again, you're collecting great data. And then the way you turn up the heat even more is to add or apply an element of time pressure. So the less time you have to make these choices that have potentially high consequence, the more engaged people are. And you can go too far. In gamification, we don't want to over-engage people because then it takes them away from the business outcomes that you have for them. So yeah, a lot of balancing, and that's a tool that we've been using a lot. So we'll use our Steve's Net Engagement Score to assess the engagement health of the community before the project even starts, or to at least estimate it. And then our platform is able to measure those choices and to measure the consequence and to assess how much we've improved the overall engagement. And we try to maximize that, but not at the expense of business outcomes. So those are two things there. One is our process, and the other one is our one of the tools that we use.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much for that revelation that you brought to today's podcast. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Steve, now we're going to move a little bit into what's kind of the second part of the interview. We had before some stories. It was a bit more longer winded in a way. These are a bit more straightforward, and I would like to know, what do you think? What comes to your mind when I ask these questions? And the first one is, if there's anything that you would say, if you introduce this, if you use this strategy, these things, it's almost always going to benefit, again, almost any gamification project, a best practice of sorts.
Yeah, so there's so many mechanics. I'd say having a perspective of trying to introduce more decisions, consequences, dilemmas, temptations when you're moving somebody through a narrative. Like it drives me nuts to even contemplate what's happened to our world as a result of air miles programs, where there was potential there for us to really create engaging systems where a user, a customer, some loyal community member was being rewarded for their loyalty. And really, we've distilled that down through loyalty points programs to just how much money did you spend? And if you spent enough, then we're going to give you something that has economic value. I mean, I just think that's ridiculous. There's no choice that's happening. The user doesn't feel any sense of consequence or dilemma or even a narrative, really. I was going to spend this money anyway. Of course, I'm going to take this flight. It's not the points that are making me take the flight. I'm spending it, and you're just giving me a discount at the end of the day. My gosh, like the things that you've overlooked by boiling down that relationship to something that's that superficial and that transactional is heartbreaking to me. And then the other one is that I think we should be spending much more time focusing on how we use collaboration over competition. And competition has become, I don't want to say popular, but it's become what we've done just by virtue of the fact that it's easy to do. Like you give people points, you put them on a leaderboard, and you kind of wipe your hands and say, well, I did a good job. It is much harder to design a collaborative system. It requires balance. It requires a lot of experience and knowledge. So we don't do that nearly well enough. None of us do, ourselves included. So I'd love to see more of that. And that the best lessons from that come from the video game industry.
Absolutely. And from the video game industry, or from the game industry in general, what would you say is your favorite game?
I'm old, so I can probably slice up my favorite games by decade, going back to the very first Telstar TV tennis that my godparents bought me when I was 7, through to the Atari 2600 games. So I spent a lot of time in adventure. The arcade games like Tempest and Dig Dug, and a pretty obscure one called Vanguard, which is still one of my favorites today, into the next gen consoles. I mean, I just love what they're doing today, with some of the first and even third person adventure games. I'm right in the middle of Tomb Raider, the most recent Tomb Raider game. What's it called? The Dark. It's got a pretty dark tone to it. I don't know, whatever it is.
We'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll have it in the show notes. I'm probably 30 hours into it, and I can't remember its name. That shows you how many games I'm in the middle of right now. Right through to the VR stuff. So one of the other companies I'm involved in is a VR gaming company. So I have to stay on top of that, and man, the immersion and the way that you can drive narrative and create a sense of presence it's astonishing. It's a game changer. So that itself, there's another full hour podcast if we want to talk about Steve's favorite games.
That is fantastic. So, Steve, you've had a while already in this podcast. We've spent quite a while talking together in Amsterdam in Gamification Europe. Is there a person that comes to mind if I tell you, would you like somebody to be in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Who I'd love to hear give their perspective on gamification. So really any of the top tier game designers who I've grown up admiring and respecting. I mean, it'd be hard to get Shigeru Miyamoto in here, who created the Mario series.
You're not the first person to ask for Miyamoto, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think his perspective would be interesting, but I come at it from probably a different perspective where I'm not really thinking about what his gameplay recommendations or view would be, but it's because the approach that he takes to designing games I find quite fascinating, which is that he doesn't actually play games. He doesn't play competitors' games. And his methodology is more about exploring the real world and looking for things like his Pikmin game came about because he spent a lot of time during a phase in his life gardening. And when you're staring down at soil and seeing, little bugs running around, and you start thinking about all kinds of things when you're doing it for hours and hours at a time. So the way that he draws inspiration from everyday things, I think, is interesting to me, because when you look at a community that's basically behaving in everyday ways, which is a customer community, how can you draw inspiration from that and to bring out some form of creativity that drives them to be even more engaged than they were before around something that's otherwise pretty mundane, like, going to the store to buy a 6-pack of Coke is not particularly exciting. Like, you do it every couple of weeks. But how do we look at that experience of being a Coke customer, and how do we draw inspiration from it and translate that into gameplay? That's what I'd love to hear Miyamoto talk about.
Very, very interesting. Very, very nice. I love that perspective as well. And if you would like to hear Miyamoto, who would you recommend us to read, like the engagers? Think of this audience with people who are maybe aspiring to go into gamification, perhaps teachers and professors who are thinking of using gamification, or who are starting at that point or have been doing it for a while. Is there any book that you would recommend any of us to read?
I'm sure this one's come up, so it's kind of a standby, is to read Flow. But to be truthful, like, other than that, which is more, I'd say, almost philosophical game design, I haven't seen a lot of books that have enough written about the mechanics. I did contribute to a book called Secrets of Game Design. I think I wrote a couple of chapters in it, but it's out of date and probably needs to be refreshed. But my source, my go-to, is actually Gamma Sutra. It's a video game designer's site. They talk about the actual mechanics of gameplay design, so many of them that are outside the scope of gamification because they're just, I think, too complex to be applied practically. But there's always something that you learn from it. Like there's always some perspective. I've written a few articles for Gamasutra as well about choices and temptation and consequence. And I think that as a repository of learning, of things that we've thought about as gameplay designers over the last 20 some odd years that I think the site's been up, maybe not quite that long, it's a great place to go. Like you can get lost in that vault for hours and hours.
Lots of information to dig from such an amazing site, for sure.
Yeah. Have you spent much time there?
Yeah.
You have, Rob? Excellent.
Yeah,
good.
It's easy.
Love to hear that.
It's easy to dig into those things. I try to restrict myself in research mode because you can just get into these wormholes and never come out.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Steve, what would you say is your superpower when designing gamification? Your sweet spot, that thing that makes you different from other people and that you think you do a great job at doing?
Well, I mean, I don't. It never feels like a superpower. It feels like I'm just like scrambling to draw through, I guess, a couple of decades of experience every time I sit down and there's challenging problems. And what I find myself doing is looking back in particular to the years designing actual AAA video games, because the way we would approach those problems is that we would cast a really big net. We'd look at a community, we'd look at a target audience, we would profile them, we'd do all kinds of psychographic and psychological analyses of who these people are and what their preferences and likes and attitudes and beliefs were. And then we'd lay out this monstrous canvas of all the things that we could possibly do. And that's fun and easy until the evil specter of reality comes swooping in and forces you to pull in the noose and to make it realistic now. So now we have to deliver this project and we only have a limited budget, a limited amount of time. That expansion through ideation and creativity, and then the contraction down to something that's practical and realistic and valuable and achievable, is something that I just naturally am very comfortable doing. And you talked earlier, Rob, about egos. Bad designers cast a big net and then they can't let go. They can't scope. They can't reduce. They can't simplify down to something that's practical. I've been a gameplay designer and I've been a producer on big budget video games. You can't be a producer without being able to scope. You can't be a designer without being creative. So not a lot of people walk both of those lines, even in the video game industry. And I feel like my background in business as well, like bringing those three together, I can understand business requirements as well as the next person. I can cast a huge net in the creative phase, but then I can also scope down practically and create an achievable product. So that's about the best I can come up with. I don't think I'm all that, but if you're going to put me on the spot,
sounds like a superpower to me.
I don't know. It just feels like common sense, but common sense isn't all that common.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard many times I'm trying to remember what they call it, but it's the when you don't realize how special it is what you're doing, because for you it's the normal thing, and for other people it's just not. When you see that going on, you know that you're into something special that maybe perhaps you can even teach to other people or use it as a competitive advantage, because other people don't find it as natural as you do, and it's certainly something very special.
I think it's unconscious competence.
So, Steve, we're arriving at the end of the interview, and I would like to know if you have any final piece of advice for the engagers, for the audience. Of course, let us know where we can find more about Steve, about the Pug Interactive, where we can find you in general, and then we'll say, of course, that it's game over. Right.
So, I'd say just to always be looking for those mechanics that make sense. If you only have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And really, to dig into something like Gamasutra and some of these other wonderful resources that expose you to all of these different gameplay mechanics. And, not all of them even require technology to deliver. Some of them just require having the perspective of what's going to make a user interested in taking the next step deeper into the system. So to do that takes some work and some open-mindedness, and then figuring out how you're going to communicate that to your client or your customer, your partner, whoever that is, because that's an iterative process where you have to be very tolerant and respectful, and throw the egos out, and be human on both sides of the table. So, that's what I love to see more of, that kind of creativity that isn't necessarily driven by technology. I believe that you'll be posting the links on the site, so we'll have the website up there so that people can click through and contact us. And yeah, I'll always love having these conversations. So whenever anyone wants to reach out, by all means.
Fantastic. We will certainly be posting it up. As far as I can remember, it was something like Pug Interactive or Pug Farm or something around those lines. Yeah, we will be posting it on the.
That's right.
Yes.
It's puginteractive.com. And we're just doing a bit of a rebranding now, but it's I'm sure by the time this gets up, we'll be able to accept all kinds of people.
There will be no discrimination.
No, exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steve. This is very much appreciated. I know your time is very, very valuable, and you're always doing all these fantastic things. So all this time that you spend here with us, with the engagers, is very well appreciated, hopefully very well received as well, because all that advice will go directly to the ears of many engagers who are looking for that advice, actually, and going to use it and implement it. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but we'll be, ruminating around all these thoughts and using them in their processes in the future. So thanks again, Steve. Thank you very much for all your wisdom. But now it's time to say it's game over. Hey Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more details about this interview with Steve Bocska, then you can go to professorgame.com/podcast/068. There you can also subscribe, and that way we can be in contact, and you will have exclusive access to opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you click continue to go to your next mission, would you like to know Pau Yanes and how he creates geolocated games and gamification? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!